Certain phrases have managed to enter the lexicon of business terminology, even though when you look at the substance behind them, there really isn't much to what the words say. An example from the governance and compliance area is tone at the top. We've been hearing and reading about tone at the top for many years now, all around the world from a wide variety of bodies looking at how governance can be improved across business. The idea, the principle behind tone at the top is that the directors, the body that leads the organisation, should be setting out a principled stand on how the business runs and operates, the actions that people in the organisation should ascribe to make sure we're adhering to strong values and principles. The reality with what's happened with tone at the top is that the tone has often been there, but the action has been missing. We can look at numerous examples all the way back to events such as Enron from the turn of the century, where they had brilliant compliance policies, compliance manuals, they had the right tone in terms of what was said should be done and the actions that should be taken, but clearly what was happening did not line up with that at all. If we look to more recent cases, there are many examples of companies with nice websites, excellent PR, policies, codes, information they produce both internally for staff consumption as well as externally that relate to the idea of the tone they would like to promote throughout the organisation. But the reality is often again that just hasn't happened. They haven't married up. If you look at the video from the Wells Fargo case where the former chairman and CEO John Stumpf is questioned by Senator Elizabeth Warren in the US from 2016, you can see how well prepared he is to talk about the tone that he as the leader of the board and the leader of the executive management set for the organisation. The things they said, the things they put in place, the procedures and policies that existed to try and make sure people acted the right way. But again, underneath that, there was a huge disconnect between what was really happening, the action that took place. In recent years, in a number of jurisdictions, including Singapore and the United States, regulators have moved to look at conduct at the top, the idea of behaviour. And this ties into a broader push over the last 10 years to focus on conduct risk in business, moving away from compliance ticking boxes towards the way people actually behave on a given basis. This can be true not just at the organisational level, but through units and teams, through segments of a company, through the organisation, the industry and an entire jurisdiction. To take this a step further, I think it's more important to consider the idea of ethical leadership. Ethical leadership alongside effective leadership were outlined pretty clearly in the 2016 update to the Code of Corporate Governance in Southern Africa. Known normally as the King Code or King 4, this code explains the ideas behind both ethical leadership and effective leadership, looking not just at what's said, what's produced on paper, but what those words actually mean, how they're embedded through the organisation. One of the things that happens when we talk to organisations and think of tone at the top is we hear certain phrases of how it's conveyed to staff, and normally the way it's conveyed is a top-down approach. A phrase we hear that again doesn't mean very much to most people is cascading, like a waterfall. Something that starts at the top cascades down levels. So something that comes from the board of directors may be then cascaded to senior management. That may be cascaded down to middle management and so on. The reality with this, and some of you will have played a game as children similar to this, where you whisper a message to a friend in a circle and they pass the message on. When the message gets all the way back to the starting point, it's a very different message. By the time the tone that started at the board has got all the way down to the lower levels, and not just from the middle but to the outside, we have a significantly different message that's been conveyed. If we think of what we should be focusing on for both ethical and effective leadership, we need to make sure that message really resonates, not just down but also back up. Think about a feedback mechanism to make sure we're getting accurate information from the ground, from the outside, in and up the chain of command, not just driving it down through cascades, through emails, memos, interviews, publications, for example. We can start looking therefore at ethical leadership from the point of view of cultural reform of business. We can survey both people internally, employees, as well as stakeholders, so third parties, vendors, suppliers, contractors, and of course our consumers. What is their cultural view of compliance within our organisation? For staff, we can do qualitative and quantitative surveys to get their view, their feedback, some metrics on compliance back to the organisation and the way they look at compliance from an ethics, governance and values perspective. So instead of just having the documentation, the tone, written somewhere, produced in nice documentation every year to be uploaded to certain sites, both internal and external, we can actually start building a view of the overall effective ethical leadership of the organisation. Bodies over recent years, including the last year the Business Roundtable in America, have produced updated principles for governance. The Business Roundtable's updated principles for governance expanded their view from a primarily shareholder capitalism focused view to stakeholders, including employees, the community, customers, third parties, and still their shareholders. The reality with what we've seen so far in 2020 has failed to live up to those expectations quite significantly. Of course, we're living in a truly unusual era. A global pandemic that's happened like it has this year happens clearly once, very rarely, in this case once every century or so. Dealing with it is not an easy task. But for organisations that less than 12 months ago said we're going to put employees at the forefront of the way we think, we're going to put ethical, effective leadership at the forefront of the way we think, and then to have been repeatedly shown not to do so in the case of a number of those organisations, smacks of, in many respects, the idea of good public relations, saying the right thing without doing the right thing. The tone at the top was strong, the action very much not so. It's time to move on from tone at the top to think about conduct, behaviour, and crucially, ethical leadership, not just at the board level, but all the way down and back up through your organisation.